Well, good morning, and thanks for this incredible opportunity to talk about my absolute favorite topic. In fact, I wish the slide said, instead of former student teacher or former superintendent, it said principal champion, because it is fundamentally my belief, and I'll go one step further than President Spellings. I absolutely agree with her. You find a great principal, you find a great school, you find a great school. There's a great principal leading that school. But in Charlotte and in my personal experience as a principal, I'll go out on a limb and say that the building level principal is the key lever for transformation. That's the belief set that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools has had for over 12 years. Fundamentally, I will hang my hat on a great principal every single day. Now, I'm also really clear that the magic for a student happens between a teacher and a student. Hopefully that magic also happens with interactions with the building level principal. But what I know is that an average principal can hire a great teacher, but only a great principal can keep a great teacher. And I saw a lot of hands go up in this audience. There are a lot of folks in this room that have been teachers, so you know that to be true. So for us in CMS, the principal has been the key lever for transformation, building by building, and also the way we scale that transformation in a large urban district with over 170 schools. So about 11 years ago, I became the chief academic officer in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And in my first one-on-one meeting with the superintendent, I said to him, we have some of the weakest leadership, building level leadership in our lowest performing schools. And in his brilliant way, an eloquent way, he said 2 words: fix it. So I went down to my office and started thinking about how I fix the fact that we need, as we all know, and I come from a banking town, and I know that the CEOs of every one of those banks in Charlotte, if they had a struggling branch, would not hesitate to put their best talent at that struggling branch and fix it or close it. In public education, for some reason, we haven't done that. And how I know that is when Charlotte-Mecklenburg put 27 of its very finest principals in its lowest performing schools, we got national attention. We were called courageous. And that was upsetting to me. And you might say a superintendent or a chief academic officer upset at national attention about being courageous. But what was troubling to me about that is, why was it viewed as courageous to put your best talent where they were needed most? But what I realized 12 years ago as the chief academic officer, when I went back down for my second weekly meeting with the superintendent a week later and said, I've done some quick assessment, and what I realized is we have our best people in the game, and there's no one sitting on the bench to come into the game, to which he eloquently said, fix it. And so what I realized is that the role of a school district, really, there are 5 components to that. And certainly our deep work with the Wallace Foundation has further reinforced what we've experienced in Charlotte, and also our work with Wallace has improved what we do. But before I start sharing with you the role of the district, I want to make sure that as you listen to Bonnie a few minutes ago talk about the things that our preparation programs were not preparing principal candidates for, I want to make sure you realize those examples were really real. So I want to share 3 experiences I had. First, as an elementary principal, and I want to say that this was in 1986 when there were no cell phones. I was an elementary principal at a Title I school and walked out into the lobby when I heard loud yelling occurring between adults, and was confronted with 2 court orders from 2 adults, both indicating that they had custody of a kindergarten student in the school. So I couldn't reach my principal supervisor at the time or anyone in our legal department. So I was resting on my Girl Scout merit badge on citizenship to think about how I go about resolving that issue. And so what hasn't been mentioned this morning is the incredible weight of responsibility a principal carries for the liability of children and their safety. And that's one example. As I moved into the middle school, I'll never forget an opportunity to sit with a grandmother and her granddaughter the morning after her granddaughter had taken a steak knife and killed someone in self-defense during a domestic violence situation. Again, that is the kind of role that a principal has to play. And lest you think delivering babies was just a funny story, let me assure you, as a high school principal, when I was on the phone with fire and medic officials and being asked to count the seconds between the contractions of a young woman in the health room, my Girl Scout first aid badge did not prepare me for that opportunity either. So the responsibility and the role of a building level principal, you had the chance to see what Shirley shared with you in terms of the executive standards and the competencies and practices that a principal is expected to demonstrate at an accomplished level, not just every once in a while, but every day. So in my role of Chief Academic Officer tasked with the Fix-It assignment, one of the first things I realized is, and it goes back to what President Spellings talked about earlier, we needed role clarity in Charlotte. While there is a North Carolina executive evaluation instrument, we realized we needed to be clear to our assistant principals and future principals what it was we were expecting a principal to be successful. And we developed a list of those competencies that were still aligned to the evaluation instrument, but made it clear that we were looking for leaders. We were not looking for task completers. And so it made it clear to our principals that we were looking for principals to lead. And here are some of the competencies that we identified as a district, just to give you a sense. An ability to build diverse relationships and their own cultural proficiency, an ability to establish a culture of high performance for students, staff, parents, and community partners, a willingness to share leadership that you heard Shirley talk about this morning that goes beyond delegation and extends to the idea of empowerment, succession planning for the inevitable transition in leadership. If you've looked at your fact sheet, you see that principals in North Carolina change on average every 2.7 years for a variety of reasons. That our principals are able to be strategic in resource allocation as they look with intentionality at how they use time, people, and money. And that they're effective communicators, particularly active listeners. Their ability to manage conflict, make data-informed decisions, be results-oriented and willing to own the outcomes, be they positive or negative, an ability to set a vision and to lead change, as well as innovation, and an ability to coach and to improve the job performance of each person under their supervision. So that was our first step, is to really make sure our leaders understood the expectations and the competencies we were looking for, and in turn they would be evaluated on. We next realized that we needed to be involved with our university partners and at the table to both co-design as well as co-select candidates for the programs. We went so far as to have an internal nomination process in our district where principals or principal supervisors nominated what they saw as high potential future assistant principals and principals. They went through a rigorous selection process, and at the end of the day, I signed off on every single candidate going into that cohort. Now, the district also invested in these individuals, and you heard how important that was just in our previous conversation with our speaker. And so the district used local dollars as well as Title II dollars to invest in the candidates' participation in the principal preparation program. that candidate also participated financially. So there was joint ownership on the part of the district and the candidate in their participation in that program. And I think it is the co-design piece that's so incredibly important. And we developed these very formal memorandums of understanding with each of our regional colleges of education. That included UNC Charlotte, that included Queen's University. We even dipped down into South Carolina, but don't tell anybody, at Winthrop University to make sure that all of our regional principal preparation programs that were providing a majority of our principals, certainly not all, that we had this cohort model in place. And what that meant for us is, on average, those programs have between 20 and 25 candidates coming out every year. If you do the quick math, 3 programs, you've got roughly 70 to 75 job-ready assistant principals coming out of those pipelines every year. So that was the beginning of establishing a bench that we didn't have in Charlotte in terms of talent ready to move into the schools. We also knew that we needed a rigorous recruitment and selection process. We recruit nationally for assistant principal and principal candidates and have developed a day-long selection process. Early on, prior to us having candidates emerging from many of the partnership programs with principal preparation, universities and colleges, we did not believe that licensure was a proxy for readiness. And so anyone that wants to be an assistant principal or principal in Charlotte has to first get into our pool. So just because you have a license does not mean you're ready to be in the pool to be considered for an opening that happens in our district. It was a powerful message to our university partners that while we were co-designing and we had a nomination process, we still wanted to have a quality control bar in place to make sure that just because you had a license didn't mean that you could start applying for leadership roles in our district. Once a principal or assistant principal was selected, we knew that we needed to continue that investment that you heard Bonnie talking about. Once candidates are prepared to be a principal, there's still a responsibility, I believe, the district has to induct assistant principals and principals into the role of leadership. So we've developed a 2-year assistant principal induction program and a 5-year principal induction program where we've created very intentional curriculum and programming and experiences for our principals starting in that first year when they're in a professional learning community with other first-year principals teaching, leading at the same level, elementary, middle, or high, with an experienced, highly effective sitting master principal in our district. They then move into a program sponsored by the business school at Queen's University that is focused on leading change. So they spend an entire year in their 3rd year thinking about how to lead change in a building. And in their 4th year, they participate in the Innovation Institute, which is an opportunity for them to think differently about how they solve problems and advance outcomes for their students in the school. And then in their 5th year, it is a self-reflective year where we talk about the notion of leading with intentionality. And now our principals are asking us what happens in year 6. What I can tell you is that after we had completed 2 cycles with all of principals going through the full 5-year induction program, the first year we had 5 of our 9 Principal of the Year finalists in the district had come through just completed their 5th year of principal induction. So what that says is that a principal who's been on the job for 5 years was being so successful that 5 of our 9 finalists had only been principals for 5 years, but they had been through our cohort model in terms of principal preparation, and then they had had 5 years of induction. So That is a lesson learned for us as well. And then finally, we know we need to continue to develop career pathways in our district for leadership, starting with teachers in the classroom and ways they can lead and remain in the classroom, ways they can step out of the classroom and remain in the school, opportunities for them to move into our principal preparation pathway, and obviously opportunities to lead at the district. Now, any superintendent that stands in front of a group like this and says the principal is the key lever for change and transformation in a school district sure better be thinking about who's supervising those principals. And so the final comment that I want to put in front of us as we begin to be inspired and innovate and think about what we've heard this morning about the role of the principal is that we think thoughtfully about the preparation as a state for the individuals who supervise these key levers of change and transformation in our schools. And so for me, we've invested equal amounts of time as we have in our principals thinking about who and the skills that our principal supervisors have as they work with our principals. So I would ask us to add that to our conversations this afternoon, and particularly as we hear from our principal panel this afternoon, I hope they will talk about the important role their supervisor plays, not only in completing their evaluation, but coaching them and stretching them and helping to lead them. Now I heard Johanna from the Belk Foundation ask a question about how we inspire people to move into the role of principal. And so I want to say to each of you, and hope you will be ambassadors of this as well, is we have to think about the messages we send, not only our principals, but also our teachers. But today we're talking about principals. So the next time you run into a principal in the grocery store or your faith house, instead of saying, oh my goodness, you're a principal, I don't know how you do what you do, it must just be awful, I watch the news. When someone tells you that they are a principal, you need to affirm that choice and validate and appreciate the incredible role they have. Because as you leave here today, there will be no way that you do not appreciate that role. But what I will also tell you is what we've learned as a district is that if you support a principal, if you're thoughtful about how they're prepared and you see that as a part of your role as a school district to be involved in the preparation of your future principals, if you have a rigorous selection process that eliminates or certainly reduces the opportunity for candidates that are not ready to move into the role, if you induct individuals in the role and you support them, you're careful about who is allowed to supervise these critical roles in public education, and you find ways to develop them, then when you're trying to strategically staff 27 of the lowest performing schools in your district, and you invite 27 of your best principals in the district to step into that role, you get 27 yeses to that invitation. And at the end of the day, that's what, as a native North Carolinian, I want for districts like Charlotte, where I've spent 34 years, but more importantly for our state. What we were able to do in Charlotte is shift the culture by placing principals at the center, supporting and validating that role, caring about who supervised them, and constantly celebrating what our principals were accomplishing. And when we strategically staffed 27 schools, we had press conferences. We made a big deal out of the fact that we had great people willing to go in and lead our toughest schools. And why can't we do that at scale in our state? My guess is because we don't have our best people in our lowest performing schools today. We have them in some, and maybe some of you will say we have them in many, but I know we don't have them in all. We have the opportunity to prepare principals and create a culture across the state where it is a badge of honor to take on the toughest assignment, much as the three principals that we'll hear from later today. For the last 3 years in Charlotte, I've had an opportunity that very few superintendents in this nation get. And that is that I had to receive and figure out how to respond to calls from principals who were saying to me, what would it take for me to lead a Title I school? For those of you who don't live K-12 education every day, a Title I school is a high poverty school. And so imagine as a superintendent, wouldn't that be amazing across our over 100 districts in the state to have superintendents having to figure out how to respond to a question because their best principals were calling and saying, what would it take for me to lead a challenging school? And what we've learned is that that is something that is an honor now in a district in our state and perhaps in others that I don't know about. But what we want collectively is that to be the case across our state. And as you heard Shirley say, at the end of the day, we want a great principal leading every single school in the state. But before we get there, we owe it to the kids in our lowest performing schools to make sure they have the best. And so the opportunity to think about what the role of a school district is and making that happen is incredibly important. If we don't, the answer to Johanna's question is going to be one that we don't like. Because what I spent a lot of my time the last 3 years talking to principals about is don't forget why you do what you do. And what we don't want to happen in the state of North Carolina is for principals to be saying, why am I doing this job? It's too tough. I'm not being supported. And so we have to make sure whether we supervise principals, whether we lead districts, whether we make policies that influence what happens to principals, whatever our role is in this room, whether we prepare principals, that we don't ever allow our best leaders to question why they're doing something. Because what we need them to do is remember the why they do it every day. And so what I know from working with 176 principals for the last 3 years is when I left the district in June, they knew why they did it. And they weren't worried about why they did the job of principal. And that's what I think we need to aspire to as a state. Thank you.